Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. For background, I'm a lifelong Utah resident, natural science journalist, published on National Geographic, ESPN, and the History Channel. I witnessed firsthand the land exchange in Tooele County during the 1980s when large areas of public land were transferred into private ownership. And it was all prior to modern cultural resource protections such as NAGPRA that we'll get into. Today, my goal is not to revisit those decisions, but to research how those sites that were documented before modern law are viewed within the current planning frameworks. I prepared this map based on a Senate bill in June. You can see that these are some areas. These are BLM here, the gold colored, and then I've done these exclamation point sort of icons to show you some areas of interest that we'll talk about today. Dead Man Cave right here, Black Rock, and you can see the county line splits Black Rock. And then the Black Rock caves are going to be on either side of that line. There's a Salt Lake and Tooele County caves. We're all familiar with Farnsworth Peak, I hope, and Adobe Rock. But some of you may not have heard of Erdley Spit out here. A very, very interesting geologic feature. And then our Wendover Caves about 90, maybe 100 miles west in this same basic corridor, really not much more than a mile wide. What happened here is that this map shows that there's public land transfers that occurred before modern archaeological standards and legal protections were in place. Now, some of these areas were studied, but only partially and under limited resources, very limited, and before ownership changed to private ownership. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, was enacted in 1990. Now, at a high level, it provides a process for the treatment, documentation, and the consultation associated with Native American human remains and funerary objects. It is fundamentally process law, it is not punitive. NAGPRA promotes dialogue and responsible handling when human remains are known or likely, especially in cases where early research predates modern standards. So in this case. And so the law is also designed as a protection for the unknown and unplanned events like things like toxic spills and earthquakes. We've just had an earthquake right near your county line. Well, it was just a few days ago, 4 days ago. As a journalist in 2019, I began researching the faults, planning on moving. And so I was just interested. It was a sort of a social distancing project, you might call it. Very casual, looking into it. I thought I had all the time in the world. But as you know, we had a earthquake, a 5.7 earthquake on March 18th, 2020. And I had written Kennecott just the day before about these caves in this area right here and over here. All looked in danger of what was happening. To me, it was a little bit startling, actually, and I think maybe I was even got a little bit excited. But now we can see this is after a year. These are the aftershocks in an area that is now being expanded by Kennecott into this area for more waste so that they can go until 2040. So those are two things that were really abrupt to me. Was this earthquake that all of a sudden threatened these areas, and the Senate bill that happened all of a sudden that could all of a sudden make these things become private land, and I don't know that we all want that. So it's taken about 6 years to get here. I've calmed down a little bit, and it's good because it took, as you can see, the pioneers a little bit longer to get here, and for us to be here having this meeting. When the pioneers arrived, we know in 1847, They walked across the country, and believe it or not, the first thing that they wanted to do was to walk another 15 miles to what would become Tooele County. And you see Black Rock Beach here. Tooele County was the first destination resort of the West, for the most part, arguably, and they would actually go on to discover the most valuable mining and archaeology sites anywhere right up on that hillside. So today's discussion is intentionally narrow. It's intentionally non-judgmental, and it mostly comes from published archaeology and federal law, and not any new claims. My aim is to introduce a small number of documented sites, the historical record around them, so that planners like you can better understand how these county lands can be valued and managed going forward. Black Rock and the Black Rock Caves straddle the Salt Lake and Tooele County line, you can see. There are multiple caves here. On the Salt Lake side, starting here, here's a Dead Man Cave that is directly east-west with Black Rock here. And then there are all the Tooele County caves. The one of particular interest is Black Rock Cave. These sites are part of a broader cluster of caves, burial sites, and shoreline features, including Danger Cave and Jukebox Cave. They're actually about 100 miles west near Wendover, actually in Wendover. And this geologic feature it's just off the map here, but it's within this same corridor called Erdley Spit, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. They have a high probability of valuable artifacts, and they have a high probability of degradation by earthquakes, accidents, sudden unplanned events. So although there was early contamination of tourists, travel, and vandalism, trash, and it did limit some studies, the significance was never ruled out, and these sites remain relevant to planning because of their documented cultural context. These experts that studied these places would be pleading today with the county to complete the project and do the job right. You can see they're just right off the side of the road there, and you'll be able to see them when you drive by. So in 1931, Black Rock Cave was excavated by Smithsonian archaeologist Julian Steward here in 1931. It was part of what he ultimately wrote, The Ancient Caves of the Great Salt Lake Region. And at the time, these caves were understood to be once submerged under Lake Bonneville, and so you had two layers. You had the deep undisturbed deposits that went into the caves when the lake was there, and then you had the cultural layers above that layer of what archaeologists were calling first peoples. And they emerged after Lake Bonneville receded. Now, at the time when they were looking at it in 1931, there was no evidence for these experts to think that there were any artifacts that were before these supposed first peoples. Well, what happened is that Steward documented these human remains within the cave. He found human remains within the cave. He also said that he found an unknown culture of an earlier human occupation. He was unprepared for this possibly unprecedented find. And so he wrote that there needed to be an excavation to bedrock that would require a large crew and many months. And that attempting to do something now, under limited conditions, risked damaging the record. Makes good scientific sense. And so as a result, he confined his work to the upper layers and above those lake deposits. And he intentionally left deeper deposits intact, preserving them for a future study that could be done properly. But that study has not yet occurred. It's, one of the reasons I'm here today. In short, Steward identified human remains here in Black Rock Cave. This probably looks very familiar to you now, right off the side of the road, and it still looks just like that today. Those remains may predate Lake Bonneville and the Ice Age. If so, the discovery may contribute to our understanding of human history. Now, he recognized that similar conditions could exist elsewhere along this east-west corridor that extends to the length of the county all the way to Wendover. Now, from a modern perspective, this places the Black Rock Caves among sites that were responsibly documented but not fully resolved under today's standards. Our modern laws say what happens to human remains, but in these places, exceptions may have been made, and they don't appear to be beneficial. So experts are asking, I think, and these experts who aren't with us anymore would be asking for some objectivity before subjectivity in planning. Again, from Steward's work, these are colorized and enhanced by AI. The top is the source, so you can always go back and look at the old photographs. Part of the problem is that we don't have good photographs of these areas. And so what you can see is that Black Rock Cave is a 315-foot rectangle corridor. It's notably perfect, and it has an irregular ceiling. And at the rear of the cave, here noted in number C, is sort of this distinct nook where an infant burial was documented. This is the exterior of the cave, obviously, and then we see this very striking rectangle corridor that is before anything was done here. They call it before excavation. When we look at the closer view, here again is that nook area. You can ignore this B slide. That's from another cave and promontory. This is a even close-up, showing some of the rocks, and then the actual grave of the infant on the grave of the adult here. Again, these were colorized, but I don't believe that there are any mistakes in the images that you see here. So roughly 50 years later, then, David Madsen and colleagues revisited Black Rock Cave. It confirmed that there are intact deposits still remaining there, and that the project was explicitly limited by funding and scope and described as sort of partial salvage, not a comprehensive excavation. And you can see, he says that the funding for the project was sufficient for only a portion of the necessary excavation. So what Steward found, and that other layer and that months of work and all that he talked about going to bedrock, has yet to occur. And there may be some scientists that don't believe that it needs to occur, but that's part of just sort of the research. That's part of the look here today, to try and understand what it is that is happening here, because these risks are happening overnight. And with those caves wide open like that, anybody can go in there. I mean, there might be some alarms, or there might be some other things like that, but anybody can go in there, and that could be dangerous. They could get hurt. Most of the work that I've described here predates modern cultural resource law, and that's the point. When you see in Madsen's, let me explain this to you, because this can be a little bit confusing. I want to take your hand on this and show you what I'm looking at here. This is from David Madsen's work in the 80s, before the switch over to private. You see the dotted lines, and then you see this line. These dashed lines are where Steward worked, and then his drawing, he just decided to do this weird thing where this drawing goes like this. Here's the trench A, where the infant burial was found. Now, these caves are documented as being cut by water completely. But you can see that this is very orthogonal back here, and this is area 1. Steward's work is along these dotted lines. Madsen came in and did along the solid lines. See that? But we can look at Steward's work, and I think it's just a lot easier to look at, to be honest. Here's Steward's map, and it's flipped. Is what's a little bit confusing. So here's trench A, and this is where the infant burial was found. here's the irregular ceiling of the cave along here in the vertical section. And here's what Steward had to say. And it's a scientist using the word perfect. So the cave is almost perfectly straight, and the southeast wall varied by 8 inches in 100 feet. It's 12 to 13 feet wide and an average of 15 feet height of the ceiling there. This is one of the reasons why the railroad called it Giant's Cave and invited tourists to come and check it out and be your own archaeologist and stuff like that. Some of the planning takeaways then from a planning perspective is perhaps straightforward. Black Cave is a documented cultural site. It's known to have human remains there, and they're intentionally preserved deeper deposits for another team to go in and look at someday. Neither the original archaeologists or later research have claimed that there's any sort of final resolution of that area too. So looking ahead, again, these areas, Dead Man Cave, at risk with these earthquakes, Black Rock Caves, and what is Eardley Spit and the Wendover Caves that have been nicely preserved, and some of these other areas. Very quickly, Eardley Spit is a geological feature that has the experts very excited. I just thought it was interesting, and it was, linear, and it was along that same corridor. But there's nothing like it of its kind except for what you're more familiar with, which is the Stockton Bar, which is down south of this, and it's about parallel to this. I don't know that it's the largest. A geologist told me that it's the largest spit of its kind, and I put on the planet, but I think that it's actually North America. That might be my mistake, and I want to apologize for that. I'm just noticing that as I'm seeing that. One thing that happened is that the Kennecott used this as an evaporating pond at some point. So there may already be some information about what we're looking at here. But right now, the bathymetric details are very limited. What's under there, very limited. And all I know is that it's really sort of a tourist destination of the local Salt Lake boat tour, because I was one of the captains on that tour for about a year and gave people tours out there. Incredible feature. Would really hate to see us briefly. It's the bottom of Lake Bonneville. It's like the bottom of the ocean of a 1,000-foot fresh lake that was once here. I don't know what's under there. It's the potential that's very, very intriguing. Because we get to look at it, and that's unprecedented. So looking ahead, we're looking at that. We're also looking at these caves down in Wendover I've been mentioning, very, very key caves, Danger Cave and a Jukebox Cave. They poured a floor down there and would have dances there when the 509th was very active down there. So that cave has some incredible history, but it also, you can see, here's one of the trenches, is one of the first, it is the first historic landmark in Utah, and it is one of the places that is writing our current understanding of human, history. These are very key places, and bottom line is Tooele County is absolutely one of the most valuable places on earth. And I have recognized that. And as I've seen these threats, I've wanted to come to you today and bring this presentation. This is one other look. This is on the Salt Lake side. This is another cave that where bones weren't found, and thus the name Dead Man's Cave. I have an appointment with a presentation much like this next week with Salt Lake County. A lot of what we've said here today is going to be said to Salt Lake County, but I hope to have a chance to bring the two sides together so we can talk in more detail. And so in that future conversation, I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss how modern, non-invasive documentation methods might support planning. And today, I think we hit the goal. And it was just simply to introduce the record and to begin to understand the appropriate framework. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.